So welcome, I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer. I know many of you, and I'm excited to welcome those who are new to La'asok for our weekly Tikva through text. Tikva means hope in Hebrew, and this is a weekly study session that's dedicated to finding hope in the act of study and in Jewish texts. We learn from a different rabbi or teacher every week. And this week, I'm really excited to welcome my good friend, classmate, fellow Cincinnati 2007 ordinee, Rabbi Evon Yakar. Rabbi Evon Yakar is the rabbi of the Tahoe Jewish community. He serves both congregations of Lake Tahoe. I see some Tahoe folks with us today, so welcome, both in South Lake and North Lake Tahoe, as well as some other emerging communities in that area. I'm going to share my screen briefly and we'll say the blessing for study together, and then I'll turn things right over to Rabbi Yakar. All right, and let's say together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, eternal one, whose mitzvot make our lives holy and who commands us to immerse ourselves, to engage ourselves in words of Torah. So Rabbi Yakar, take it away.
Thank you, Rabbi Streifer, and thank you, Asok, for the opportunity to study, to learn, to share, and thank you all for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, which is such an awesome experience. I want to start by just welcoming you all to this moment of thinking about tikva, thinking about hope. And as the title shared that Rabbi Streifer asked me for many months ago, finding hope in Jewish learning is what I arrived at. This is my second opportunity to teach in this setting. And I learned from one of our shared great teachers, Rabbi Streifer, and my great teachers, Rabbi Dr. Jonathan Cohn, that Jewish learning from our tradition is a source of where we begin to respond to everything in life. That the act of engaging and asuk b'divrei Torah, to immerse ourselves, to busy ourselves with words of Torah, with ideas of Torah, is where it can begin. And so that's how I arrived at this idea of discovering or finding hope in Jewish learning. I have a short collection of texts with our 30 minutes here to give us a way to think about first, before we even think about tikva, but thinking about possibility. So I want to put a question out there. What is possibility, and how do we imagine or think of possibility? What comes to mind when we hear the words possibility, or what is possible? Anyone who would like to share? I'm going to start by just letting you try. If that doesn't work, I will call on you when you raise your virtual or actual physical hand. What is possibility? What comes to mind? I see openness and options in the chat. Anyone want to share with their voice? What is possibility? Free will, goodness, I saw pop up in the chat. Choices, right? Possibility entails our volition, the ability to make different choices. Hope. Any other thoughts out there? Right? So when I think about possibility, there's a story in our show, moving forward, I see from my friends Jamie and Dan Oakes in Sacramento, right? I think of possibility, I think of a Hebrew phrase or a Hebrew word that often gets translated as perhaps, but it reminds me of possibility, and that's the word ulai. Ulai appears in Tanakh, in our Bible, but it's also a very common modern usage in modern Hebrew, right? Like when people want to respond to a request to make a commitment, right? You know, maybe modern Israelis, at least a lot of my friends, don't always want to commit to things like social engagements, and a common response, ulai, perhaps, maybe I'll join you at that cafe or something like that. Ulai, maybe it will happen. So I want to start with a text. And you're going to get to see, the next text in there too. Do your best to just focus on the one we're starting with. From the scroll of Eicha. Eicha is Lamentations. We read it ritually on Tisha B'Av, the lowest day in our Jewish calendar cycle. And here, as our tradition teaches, the prophet Jeremiah, perhaps the author of Eicha, is lamenting. He's challenged. He's in total despair. And yet in chapter 3, he begins to rise a little bit. And towards the end of this third chapter, he begins to, ulai, see possibility. And he writes, or Eicha has in it written, Yiten ba'afar picho, ulai yesh tikva. Let him put his mouth to the dust. There may yet be hope, or perhaps there may be hope. What's going on here? Any thoughts? Any things come up when you think about putting our mouths to the dust? And then that's a source of possible hope? What might be going on here? Remember how to get the chat back. There we go. Humility. Someone said, Sabrina, can you say a little bit more about humility? Or Ginger, a little bit more about doing the work. What is the work spoken about in this verse?
Um, I guess part of it said that it's not so much about you, it's more about the greater purpose. The work of doing the greater purpose is not just about you. It's doing things for the greater good.
Oh, beautiful, right? Like seeing beyond ourselves, right? That ulai
Exactly.
and perhaps
Exactly.
possibility, tikva, hope
Beyond yourself.
is not only focused
Beyond
on
yourself.
ourselves, right? We're a part of it. It makes me think back to
Yes.
the pandemic era in which we had to shift as humanity from our individual needs to think about our community global needs, right? That there's a certain piece, and like I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but the whole vaccination reality is about herd immunity, as they say. I'm not a physician in the medical world, but I studied enough about it, right? It's about the collective. It's about more than ourselves, right? Lindsay writes, man started from dust, nothingness, yet people, human life came from the dust, right? That we have the ability to rise from it. I love that. That's what I hear in there. And Eve just puts from Thornhill. Beautiful. Thank you. Some of the things that I think is the power to imagine and engage towards possibility, right? That sometimes we have to put, maybe not literally, but our faces to that dust, which I think Jeremiah might be giving us two ways to understand. I don't know. I'm not him. I wasn't there. I can't ask him, unfortunately, right? But it could be this, like, right? This bowing down, this prayerful posture, putting our face in the dust, recognizing our origins to that point of that was made by Lindsay about starting from the dust, right? But it could also be being in dust, like I think of the Givurot, part of our Amidah cycle of prayers, right? That keeping faith with those who sleep in the dust comes up in there. It's one of the powers of the divine that we are the agents of, from my theology. We are the agents of that power to keep faith even with ourselves, right? Rabbi Streifer put his mouth to the dust. Sounds a little like put your nose to the grindstone, working hard, believing that it's possible. I would flip Rabbi Streifer's last phrase there the other way, right? Believing it's possible to do and change things, and therefore working hard, right? We put our faith, our mouth, our faces, our mouth to the dust. We grindstone concept. I love that, right? And then we're able to perhaps recognize the hope or find that first spark of the hope. So the next text, I want to give you the source where I learned this story. Came from a series that I participated in September this year by Pardes, an organization based in Jerusalem and has educational opportunities around the globe. It was a series for Jewish educators on despair, resilience, and hope. It was a three-part series with great scholars. As we prepared to commemorate and honor the first anniversary of October 7th. And this story was presented to us in the context of hope. And the story, as you can read with me, told by Rabbi Stephen Fuchs in the name of Ambassador Rabbi David Saperstein. Once there was a man who traveled to Sodom every day asking the people there to repent their evil ways and to change. They scoffed at him and mocked him. But every day he would return with the same message of repentance. When he returned home, his wife and family chided him. Why do you go down there day after day? Don't you know those people will never change and become like you? You may be right, the man would answer. Perhaps. Ulai. Those people will never change and become like me. but I must go down there day after day so that, God forbid, I do not become like them. And so even in the face of wickedness that defies description, we must never abandon hope. What do we see, hear, feel in this story? Does it make us responsible for anything? Rabbi?
Yeah, maybe this is on my mind anyway because I was just looking up these passages, but I not long ago found a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "The one who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it," which dovetails with things that like Elie Wiesel said, you have to choose sides. Heschel said, he said, you're either a slave of Pharaoh or you are Pharaoh. If you're not out there speaking against evil, then you are allowing evil. And so this story, which I've never heard before from Rabbi Fuchs, sounds a little bit like, yeah, I got to go speak against this, but not only because I need to change other people, but because not speaking against it makes me complicit with the evil that others are doing. Not speaking is an act of tikkun. It is an act of helping me. Sorry, speaking is an act of tikkun. It is an act of making the world better in and of itself.
Beautiful. We have to take sides, right? I think that's the distillation perhaps of Wiesel and King and perhaps Fuchs here as well. Cheryl, I see your virtual hand raised.
Yeah, it reminded me of a story about a little boy who's on the seashore and is covered with
Starfish?
starfish. Yeah, thank you. I couldn't think of the word. And he's picking them up one at a time and throwing them out to the sea. And the man comes by and says, "What are you doing?" And the little boy said, I'm rescuing these starfish because they're going to die if they sit out here too long." And the man said, "There's so many of them. You're not going to be able to save them all. What does it matter?" And the boy picks up another one and throws it out to the sea and said, "Well, it matters to that one."
Beautiful. Right? It's very much akin to our tradition's perspective on saving one life as saving the universe or a universe, right? That we in each life is all of possibility. I'll make that stretch, that leap there. Lindsay puts in the chat, that reminds me of saying, if you never ask, the answer is always no. And Ginger also poses a really powerful, very short 5-word, not speaking is a choice. Right? And I think that all of that is there. I think one of the things that I love about this short story is how it ties into, for me, the concept of Sodom, right, is not something only in history, back there in the mythology of our tradition and our story. Rather, it is those places that have become so overcome and overrun by evil or the wrong direction or a lack of action, dare I say, a lack of possibility and a lack of hope. And Sodom can represent that for us, right? And this individual who goes down into amongst that sin and this horrible reality that Sodom represents for us each and every day, that's commitment, that's action, just simply because of the possibility. Right? Perhaps that is one component or one ingredient in the recipe that is the definition of tikva, of hope, right? That there has to be possibility in it, and we must continue towards it, even if it is the choice to not speak, but be present. Be present, right? The common saying that I've heard many times, I'm sure somebody might know where it's from, right? I see Cheryl holding up, it matters, the starfish, beautiful, right? The concept of in a room full of people sitting down, sometimes we need to be the person standing up, right? That's the, we need to make a choice, right? And I think the idea that this story that Fuchs, Rabbi Fuchs uses this word perhaps is what caught my attention, because it sparks for me in Hebrew efsharut, right? The possibility of something different, maybe even something not yet imagined. Rabbi Streifer puts in the chat for us, if we're not following, like Hillel, in a place where no one is, humans strive to be human. When little hope, it helps to take action. That is what I am doing, Ginger writes. And Sabrina, we have to remind ourselves every day not to turn to evil. Rabbi Streifer putting Hillel's quote in here reminds me of my favorite, I don't even know what to call it, but just a public service campaign in Jerusalem in the year that Micah and I, Rabbi Streifer and I lived in Jerusalem in our first year of rabbinical school. I don't know if you remember this, Rabbi Streifer, but this on lampposts was a picture of a person walking a dog, and it said, "Tihyeh ben Adam tenakeh acharav," and which translates as "be a human being and clean up after your dog," right? You know, like pick up the poop, right? You know, you're in the city, right? You know, I live right here on a beautiful mountain meadow, and the amount that doesn't get picked up, and that's our watershed. I mean, we drink that water. It drives me nuts. But it's a beautiful reality of the little things we can do, perhaps, to make that world better. So I want to remind us of the story of Sodom itself, because the word ulai, this concept of possibility, actually appears there. And I think that's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, is the idea of what might be possible. I only brought the beginning of that episode, right? What if, perhaps, this is Abraham speaking back to God. What if perhaps, maybe, there should be 50 innocent within the city? Will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to bring death upon the innocent as well as the guilty, so that innocent and guilty fare alike. Far be it from you, exclamation point, at least in the English. Shall not the judge of all the earth deal justly? Hashofet kol adam la'oseh mishpat is the Hebrew. Beautiful poetry there. And Adonai, God answered, if I find within the city of Sodom 50 innocent ones, I will forgive the whole place for their sake. And we know that this cycle goes on all the way down to the minyan, right? The concept of 10, ultimately, they're not to be found. But the question that comes out at me in this context of tikva, of hope, and ulai, of possibility, right? Even when God fails to see possibility, we must. Let me see, I want to say that again, because for me, that's my learning. That's what I've taken away in preparing this. Even when God fails to see possibility, we must. I have an exercise that I ask all of my B-Mitzvah students to engage with. I actually had one of the boards I work with engage in this this week as an experiment, and it's called the God exercise, where we get to imagine what we think we believed about God at different milestone ages in our life. For B-Mitzvah students, it's preschool, first grade, fourth grade, and current seventh grade-ish. For adults, we pick different, longer, because our lives are more experienced, etc. Ultimately, we have this conversation about, wow, the picture you've drawn or the words you wrote in each of those boxes for each of those ages is not the same. Does that mean God's changed or you've changed? Inevitably, everyone who's responded that I've done this with, which is probably well over 100, 200 folks by now, responds and says, well, no, I've changed. It's a recognition of our understanding, right? And yet one of the students responded to me after working on that exercise, said, well, God really is the collection of all human thoughts and behavior and actions, past, present, and future. And in that context, it becomes our responsibility to ulai, to see that possibility when perhaps even God doesn't. That when even God doesn't. There's a number of more messages in the chat. I want to make sure we all see them. Sadly, these texts and the modern quotes notwithstanding, I feel hopeless right now. I don't know how to speak out. And Rabbi says, I feel this, right? What to do the face and the power that doesn't seem to care about humanity, right? Someone saying I had to start by screaming, and there's lots of comments following up on that idea of feeling hopeless in this moment. And so the last text in here that I pulled from the learning I had with the Pardes program this past fall comes from the late Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Zichrono Livracha, who in two different texts wrote, one of the most important distinctions I have learned in the course of reflection on Jewish history is the difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is the belief that things will get better. Hope is the belief that together we can make things better. Optimism is a passive virtue, hope an active one. It takes no courage to be an optimist, but it takes a great deal of courage to have hope. Knowing what we do of our past, no Jew can be an optimist, but Jews have never, despite a history of sometimes awesome suffering, given up hope. And in a different text, he writes, to be a Jew is to be an agent of hope in a world serially threatened by despair. Every ritual, every mitzvah, commandment, every syllable of the Jewish story, every element of Jewish law is a protest against escapism, resignation, or the blind acceptance of fate. Judaism is a sustained struggle, the greatest ever known, against the world that is, in the name of the world that could be, should be, but is not yet. There is no more challenging vocation. Throughout history, when human beings have sought hope, they have found it in the Jewish story. Judaism is the religion and Israel is the home of hope. The part that resonates and gave rise to the title of Finding Hope in Jewish Learning is this concept of every syllable of the Jewish story, every ritual, every mitzvah, every element of Jewish law, right? Even in our prayer, classically, there's a moment of study in the Shachrit cycle, in the morning prayer cycle, right? We study, we learn. Why? Because it gives the context to discover this tikvah, this hope. Because of the challenges we as a people have faced, and our story gives to the world and anyone who wants to read it and wrestle with it and engage with it, it gives us the recognition that even against those greatest moments of despair, that awesome, sometimes awesome suffering, we have been able to together make things better. Right? It's the concept of that moral arc of history, to bring King into the conversation again, having honored his birthday this week. Right? This idea of ulai, of possibility. The work, though, begins with us. The work begins with our ability to, as one person wrote in the chat, to just scream. Maybe we have to start there. We have to scream against it. Sometimes it begins with imagining what's possible, to engage towards that possibility, but knowing that we have the power, even perhaps, ulai, when God doesn't. Even perhaps when God doesn't. So I want to move towards concluding our short, brief time here with asking that question I started with, and hopefully some other voices will share. What is possibility? Where does this journey begin towards this tikvah, towards this hope? What is possibility?
Can I just lift up something that's in the chat about that, which is that someone talked about wanting to scream, and there was some discussion about that being a good place to start. That possibility starts maybe from righteous rage, from an anger, or can start from an anger when the world is not right. Maybe it's not the only place to start, but it can be, and it is something that I think some people are feeling right now.
Yeah, I remember these primal scream gatherings in fields during the pandemic, right? That people who were just so pent up, and they would meet up in socially distanced, safe places outside to just scream, just to let it out, put that energy out into the world, right? What else does possibility mean? I'd love to hear one or two other voices. Make me think some more. I think of the hymn By the Waters of Babylon as an example of Jewish story imbuing others with hope, right? That just the simple act of gathering by those rivers of Babylon, right? You know, it's like we're still yearning. Susan, I see your virtual hand raised. Go for it.
I guess having now muddled over this and gotten extremely angry, not about this, but in general, I think that possibility means that nothing is impossible.
I love that. That is beautiful, Susan, right? That in thinking about possibility, nothing is impossible, right? That the ability to move beyond. Thank you for that. Ginger puts in the chat, we can do this. We can stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, right? And I think this is helpful to me to think about a commentary. I think it's on Talmud Brachot, that talks about those who were at Sinai are more authoritative, right? So that those more ancient voices are those that are the most authoritative. But in that same stream of consciousness commentary in that passage, and I don't recall where it's from exactly, but I'm pretty sure it's Brachot. It said, the next phrase says, yeah, but we stand on their shoulders, right? And the realization that we can use those ancient older stories as examples of what Susan shared, nothing is impossible, to see further, to see more, to have a broader view, to have more context to build upon. And I think that's the part of our story that is so powerful, and engaging and studying our story and wrestling with it can inspire us, can initiate us to recognize that we can overcome not only fear and despair and anxiety, but move towards that ulai, that possibility, and eventually towards hope. So as we think about the beginning of the plague cycle in this week's parasha, in this week's Torah portion, we see another example of challenge, of really real hardship for humanity in that story. And yet moving from a narrow place, moving beyond that is ulai, is possible. And that's important for us to hold on to. And we can see that in so many places within our story, and wrestling with it through either ritual, direct study, fulfillment of mitzvot, in our liberal approach to Jewish life and modern living. May we discover that tikva through our text.
Let me thank you, Rabbi Evon Yakar, for this really engaging and important discussion. I want to thank you for holding all of the things that people are feeling right now. We're going through challenging times right now, and I think people need hope. We need tikva. We need resilience. We need to know that we have work to do and that it's okay not to know where to start. And so this notion of ulai, this notion of possibility, I think gives us at least something to hold on to right now. Being together in community, connecting with our tradition, these are the sources of tikva, these are the sources of hope. Two quick announcements. First of all, actually three, because Rabbi Yakar just put his source sheet into the chat, so feel free to download it. Those were some wonderful sources. Next week, we will be studying with another classmate of ours, actually, Rabbi Emily Losbin of North Carolina. And for those who are new this week, for those who are Lake Tahoe, what do you call them? Lake Tahoeans, or whatever you guys call yourselves.
Mountain Jews.
There you go. We do this every week, so come back, join us. It's half an hour, and we learn from somebody different, and it's always hopeful. So next week with Rabbi Emily Losbin Ostrov, and I mentioned in the chat the Social Justice in Our Texts series. It is a once-a-month series where we explore a different area of social justice in Jewish texts. The next one is February 10th, and it's called From Anxiety to Action, Torah for Climate Justice, with Rabbi Laura Bellows of Dayenu. And I just put into the chat the link to sign up for that. If you're already signed up for the series, then you'll get an email about it. If you're not, please come join us. Those have been really meaningful and important discussions as well. My thanks again to Rabbi Evon Yakar. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'll wish you an early Shabbat Shalom, and we will see you next week. Take care, everyone.
Have a wonderful day. Shabbat